Planning Board meeting. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yay.
There we go.
Thank you all.
Right.
All right, first on the agenda is public comments. Does anybody out there have anything to talk about? Come on up, just please give us your name and address.
Hampshire, 184 New Road. I think it's in I just want to report on the zoning subcommittee that I received.
Yep.
I just want to address something that hopefully that the language of this can be tightened up a little. Instead of purpose of intent of the nursing home. Okay, to tighten up that to maybe just the skilled nursing facility and the memory impaired unit uses.
Okay,
And
so we're gonna have a.
not nursing homes.
I'm sorry.
And not nursing homes?
And no.
Okay.
We're gonna have a
Nursing homes
workshop
are
on it.
broad,
Allowances.
Category.
yeah,
Yeah.
category for everything else. So I just want to make sure it's.
Okay, we'll note that. We're gonna have a workshop on it at our next meeting.
I understand, and I really want to thank Diane for all your work and keeping us up to date.
Okay, you're certainly welcome, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
you.
Does anybody else have anything to discuss on that or any other subject that's not on the
Can
agenda?
I say something? Do I
Sure.
have to go up there?
No.
How will you say it as a?
Roseanne Cox, 332 Wadley Falls Road, Newmarket. I just have concerns with all the fire pits that are being used in town. It is, you know, you've got a hot day, you might have your ACs on, and you want to open your window at night to get some fresh air in there and save some money on electricity. And you've got fire pits, and you got to close your windows. It's not healthy. So many people have called me up and complained about it. Even when my husband went down to get the permit, the gal who gave the permit at the fire department said she has immense problems in her neighborhood. Now, my daughter got a house in Salem, New Hampshire, a very nice neighborhood, and in their association, they're not allowed fire pits or smokers for cooking. And I really think it's something we should look into. And they can burn from 5 at night till 9 in the morning. It's awful. It is awful, especially if you live on the wrong side of the street with the prevailing, the summer winds are. We have to close our windows constantly. It's not healthy. It just isn't. So, some feedback on that. If there's any people out there that have their problems, I know someone had called in the area where there's quarter-acre house lots, and the people are burning right next door. It's not healthy, and they had little grandchildren in there. So it's something I think that should be addressed. All right? Just want to put in your
Okay.
radar. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody have anything else? All right, we'll close the public comments at 7:05. We'll go on to the next agenda item, which is review and approval of the minutes. Is there a motion? The minutes of June 13th.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of June 13th, 2017.
Second.
Any discussion, comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I'm abstaining.
I'll abstain.
Amy's abstaining also. Motion passes, thank you. First on the agenda for regular business is Kyle Pimental of Stratford Regional Planning Commission, Stormwater Regulation Update. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Kyle Pimental. I'm the principal planner at Stratford Regional Planning Commission. I'm going to talk pretty briefly about an upcoming project that the Planning Commission is working on in association with the town of Newmarket. And that is to update your existing stormwater regulations. So I'm going to give a project background, how we came to where we are today, the process, the timeline, where the funding is coming from, and what the overall project goals are for this project. So to give a little bit of a background, this area in New Hampshire, specifically southeastern New Hampshire, saw a lot of growth and a lot of development happening in the 2000s and even prior to that into the 90s. And with all that new development and growth, there was a lot of impervious coverage, there was a lot of sprawl that was happening. And along with that, we also saw some regional climate changes. Specifically, if you remember the 2006 and 2007 flooding events, those were major events that we hadn't seen in this part of the state ever, and they happened back to back. The result of that was increased stress on the natural systems within the area and also stress on the town's aging infrastructure. This led to pollutant loads increasing, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus, more stormwater runoff, which was gathering oil and grease, trash, pet waste, sand sediment, road salt, all of that discharging along with other pollutants into the nearest water body and into eventually Great Bay, which was leading to declines in water quality. So Newmarket in 2010 took steps to address that and developed some stormwater regulations. Since then, there have been a lot of advancements since that 2010 effort that the town went through. And probably most importantly is the creation of the Southeast Watershed Alliance. They got together in, I think, 2009, formally 2010, I think, but they didn't release their model stormwater regulations in 2012. So the town didn't have that resource when you first developed your regulations. Since then, since 2012, they're now updating that model. Two things that are really important for the update that's ongoing right now. One is that they're using new precipitation data, which is coming from the Cornell Atlas. Before that, they were looking at what's called technical paper number 40, which is an engineering study that was done, I think it was published in 1961, and it was looking at the frequency of rainfall for engineering designs. But it was looking at historical rainfall from the 40s and 50s, and that's a lot of what engineering studies were being based on. So now they've incorporated new precipitation data. They've also updated some management strategies for redevelopment, and they've also changed some of their impervious coverage standards. So those are the three main pieces that are in the new update. With that being said, the town is also subject to new MS4 requirements. So it was a good time for the town to sort of look at what was on the books to sort of address what's on their current regulations. So to talk about the funding for this, the Planning Commission, along with various coastal partners, the Rockingham Planning Commission, the Department of Environmental Services, UNH, and the Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve all submitted an application to NOAA in early 2016 as part of their coastal management grant, which is called their Project of Special Merit. This particular project is called New Hampshire Setting Sail, and one of the primary focuses for this particular project is to implement recommendations from the Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission, which released their final report in October of last year. There was a request for proposals that were sent out in the spring of this year. We promised that any eligible community would have at least $6,000 of technical assistance from the Planning Commission. Because there were going to be some extra meetings, we were able to give Newmarket a little bit more than that. Newmarket received $8,000 in technical assistance. The other reason for that is some of the other communities in our region weren't going to need $6,000 to do their project. So we were able to shift some money around and give Newmarket a little bit more. The planning department, specifically Diane Hardy, submitted their application to update their stormwater regs. I think it was around April, and this project has been fully funded. To give you an idea of some of the project partners, this would be myself representing the Planning Commission, the Newmarket Planning Department, Diane, UNH Cooperative Extension is part of this, specifically Amanda Stone and Lisa Gratian, if you know them, and the UNH Stormwater Center. And while they're not part of our grant, they have informally agreed to take a peer review and look at the ordinance or the regulations and offer their input. So they're not getting paid to do that, but they work directly on the update for the Southeast Watershed Alliance. So they've got the expertise and they'll be able to give us some guidance. So my guess it'll probably be Jamie Houle that will be working on that. He has offered his services, which is great. In terms of process, we'll be working with a subcommittee. I'm sure that some of you have already been reached out to from Diane to go through this process. And also the UNH Cooperative Extension is going to help develop some outreach materials that can be used to send out to the public. We'll hold a public hearing to present changes to this board, solicit some feedback, and then we'll come back again for final adoption. So in terms of a timeline on what this sort of looks like, our first kickoff meeting is tonight. The regulatory audit, which will be done with the Planning Commission and that subgroup, will probably take place between now and September. We'll hold our first, we anticipate 1 to 3 meetings with the subcommittee. We're hoping to have those draft regulations sometime by October. Draft for comment in November. We've scheduled 2 planning board meetings. I don't know if those are the exact dates. I was just basing that off of the website. But November 14th and December 12th to present to this board to solicit some feedback. As I mentioned, in that December, January, we'll develop some outreach materials that will pass out. That will be with the UNH Cooperative Extension, and then come back in January and February to hold those public hearings for final adoption. The grant closes in March, so we hope to have it adopted by then. We're not necessarily tied to that with the grant. So the grant, the way that we wrote it in was we would have a final document for consideration at the planning board, not necessarily adopted by the planning board. However, the goal is to have it adopted by February, March of next year. And in terms of overarching goals, really, I mean, this is looking at your existing regulations to ensure that any new development or redevelopment reflects any state-of-the-art thinking, any new technologies, and is consistent with what other communities are doing in the region. There have already been a handful of communities in the coastal watershed that have adopted these regulations, but none have adopted the new ones, obviously because they're not even released yet. But there are, as part of this setting sail project, I think there are 3 or 4 other communities that are going through this process to update their stormwater regs. And the second large goal is to just be better equipped to meet future challenges. So meeting the new MS4 requirements and being resilient against other coastal hazards, whether that's riverine flooding or any sort of sea level rise. So with that, I know that was sort of real quick, but I'll be taking questions.
For our public audience, can you just explain what MS4 is?
Sure. So MS4 is the Municipal Separate Storm and Sewer Systems, and it's a new general permit subject to urbanized areas through the census, which basically looks at and requires new stormwater management. So Newmarket, I think this is the first time that you've been in this. Other communities, it's all based on census urbanized areas. It now lumps Newmarket into that group. So you'll have, the town is going to be responsible for new monitoring and making sure that they're handling their stormwater and that it's not discharging directly into a water body. There's a lot more to it than that, but in a very general sense.
Okay, so, Diane, are we
Go ahead.
opposing that MS4?
We are, but we're moving forward as though, at some
Understood.
point, we're going to have to deal with stormwater management, whether it's through a mandate from EPA or through our own sense of what's good planning and development for the community. And
Right.
so this process, I think, is going to be useful regardless of what the outcome of that is.
Oh, I agree. I agree. I just think that, to be fair, the town, through the council, is taking the position that we're going to fight the MS4
Right.
requirements, right?
But I have talked to the...
Massachusetts just won. Massachusetts, they just got
Right.
thrown out. They won. They appealed to EPA and they threw out MS4.
And when the resolution came before the council, I did have a discussion with the town administrator, and he advised me to keep going on your separate track, and we'll see what happens, so.
Oh,
so
I agree.
that's what we're doing.
I agree with that.
We're
I mean, There's
just-
some good things that'll come of this
Yeah.
anyways.
Right.
Could you, excuse me, could you please come up to the microphone and give your name and address, please? For those.
Simple question. Kim Parrott, 7 Eagle Drive. What are the other communities, the 3 or 4 communities?
In our region?
Right.
So
that are
there's,
doing this?
so there's no communities in our region that are doing this, but in Rockingham's region, there are 3 or 4. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I could email Diane.
Hey,
So then
Exeter.
my further question would be, are you collaborating with
Yes.
those
Rosie, hold
same
on.
ones in?
Yeah.
We're working off the same model. So that model regulatory ordinance that the Southeast Watershed Alliance, those towns are going to use that same document. So that model, it's the way to use it is to sort of tailor those regulations to what the town has already and pick and choose what you want to incorporate. So towns sometimes do it a little bit differently in terms of Newmarket has their stormwater regulations in their site and subdivision regs. Other communities sometimes have it in zoning. I think most communities have it in site and sub, but for the most part, it's going to be a pretty straightforward model. But those other communities are doing the same thing, the same process.
Okay, hold on one second. Diane, you.
I
you
think
wanted to
when
add?
Julie LeBranch was here a couple of weeks ago, she did mention she was working with the town of Sandown,
Sandown sounds.
and that was a kind of a model that they were looking at because there was some new language. And I know that Exeter has been very aggressive, if you will, in making sure they have their regulations and their program in place. And I'm pretty sure Greenland as well. So those are other communities. And of course, the
Yeah.
town of Durham has been
The
sort
town
of
of
the
Durham has,
four leaders in our region.
Rollinsford has new regulations that we updated. They haven't adopted them yet. Same with Rochester. Rochester has updated regulations, but they haven't adopted them yet.
Roseanne, you had something to say?
You said that the study was done from the weather patterns in the 40s and 50s was the time period that was used for the study. Why did they choose the 40s and 50s?
Well, the report was released in 1961. So they were just using historic rainfall data from that time period. And that has been, for a long time, that has been the rainfall frequency technical paper that they've used for engineering studies for a very long time. It's only been within the last maybe 5 years or so since the Cornell Atlas data has become available where those precipitation rates have gone up. So that's the difference. Instead of designing infrastructure for rainfall events that were happening 60 years ago, the Cornell Atlas is now looking at updated precipitation rates.
Okay, and the Cornell Atlas, how did they looked at the 40s and 50s and they updated it?
They looked a lot longer.
on the
They looked
current.
at a lot longer stretch of, and incorporated new precipitation that was happening recently in the last 10 to 15 years.
And who compromised the group with the Cornell Atlas study?
I don't know.
I think
Yep.
it's a national thing.
It's a
Because
national thing?
I believe it is, because cities like Newburyport, like I've had to design to the Cornell number for the last 10 years or
Right.
more.
Okay.
People have been using it, it's more
Is
of
it the
a.
model Army Corps uses?
Yeah.
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 And is that going to be a greater cost to the towns to implement all these
No.
changes? No?
Well, no, the MS4 and the Cornell is just a number that an engineer uses to size detention ponds, basically.
Okay,
And with the Cornell numbers versus the old numbers, the detention ponds become bigger because the
Okay.
rainfall is more intense.
all right, okay.
So that, the MS4 stuff, yeah, there's gonna be expenses to the town, to every town when you implement that stuff, but we'll address that stuff as it comes along.
Okay, all right.
Eric brings up a really good point that a lot of engineers have been using the Cornell Atlas, like I said, over the last at least 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So it is now something that developers don't come in and say, what is this new? It has been around for a while.
Okay, all right. Thank
Does
you.
anybody else have any questions, comments? Diane?
When is the new model going to be out? We've been waiting with bated breath.
I know, we have been waiting patiently for that. Their draft is up on their website now.
Oh, it is,
So if
okay.
you go to the Southeast Watershed Alliance's website, they have the current regulations from 2012 and they do have the draft 2017 model up there.
Good.
They've cleaned it up quite a bit. It's a lot shorter, and it really focuses on just the language that you need to have in your regs and not all of that other process stuff, which was a little bit confusing, especially because they gave you all those different options.
Yeah.
I think they're moving away from the zoning and sticking with site and sub because all the communities have kind of gone that route. But it is up on the website. I don't know when their next board of directors meeting is, but what we were told is that the next board of directors meeting, they're going to officially adopt it.
Very good. Thank you, Kyle.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Anybody in the audience have any other questions? Thank you very much, Kyle.
Yeah, no problem.
So Diane, we'll be setting up a subcommittee.
Well, we have
one set up?
we have two people who have come forward, Peter Nelson and Gretchen, to work with Kyle and myself, and we thought we would do some outreach to the Conservation Commission to see if there was anyone there who was interested. Rosie, maybe you
I
could
have a meeting
forward
Thursday
that,
night, I'll ask them.
forward that question to the Conservation Commission. And of course, we're hoping to have Rick Malasky join us, and our town engineer may participate as well.
Alrighty, moving on. Next on the agenda is Cheney Property Management Corp. Continuation of a request for extension of approval for an application for site plan and special use permit at 52, 54, and 56 Exeter Road, tax map U4, lots 12, 13, and 14, M2A zone. The approval was to remove 3 existing buildings and construct a 2-story, 27,000 square foot mixed-use building with commercial use on the first floor and residential on the second floor. I see Mr. Cheney out there. Welcome.
Evening, ladies.
So could you just briefly describe what's occurred on the site since the approval? Or what's occurred behind the scenes, whatever, where you are right now in the project?
Not long after getting the approvals, I went through the process of having the sites evaluated for any contaminants, asbestos and all that. After that was finalized, I had it all taken care of by a company so that they could be set up for demo. There's still viable units, in the water, sewer, all the electricals, everything's still there. A lot of it was, asbestos flooring, that kind of stuff that needs to be back down, tenants were required. And so, through that process, been talking to a lot of banks, and Newmarket's come a long way in the perception out there, and a lot of banks really enjoy what they see here. And at the end of the day, the banking practices are, as much as they like the projects themselves, back, a long time ago, they used to loan you the money based on the project. Today, that's not the way they're doing it. They're basically loaning money on whatever cash you have that's not already being used for other projects or payments. It's got to be absolutely untapped and ready to go. So I don't have a lot of that, and I've been having a hard time trying to find somebody who would step up to spend the money to get the project going. And here we are, we'll be 5 months away from a 2-year window. And I don't see anything changing on my part. The few people that have, come into play as far as possibly investing in it, a lot of these people, it's booming out there. People are out straight building, but that's the problem. They all got their money sunk everywhere else. And until that's all done, they can't jump into a new project, especially the size. This is not a small project, $3-4 million. It's not something you're gonna have a lot of people waiting in line to jump in on. So I'm trying to just be proactive. I know just through the process that I am not going to be able to get funding in place in the next 5 months to get the project started. So I said, you know what? Might as well be proactive and come in, make sure everybody's up to speed, see if we can't get the extension for a couple of years to buy some time to hopefully either somebody could buy it at build it, or we get partners to come in, or I win the lottery or something, we build it anyway.
And you'll sell it or move somewhere else.
So, that's basically, you know, what's going on. I did pull demo permits, and all of that's been in place, but I didn't want to actually tear down the buildings until I knew we could go somewhere with it. That's kind of all that's been done so far.
Okay. Dan, would you refresh my memory? What did the approval say?
We actually have a developer's agreement that was signed back, I don't know, 2016. And there is a section, as you know, in the developer's agreement about vesting of projects. And vesting is an important concept because if there are changes in the regulations, it's in the developer's best interest to have the project be vested so that they would be immune, if you will, from the changes. And it's based on what the state RSA is. And let me just refer you to the section of the developer's agreement. I sent everybody a copy of that after our last meeting. If you go to page 9 and paragraph L, there's a section on vesting, and it basically states that the site review approval is deemed to have lapsed after 24 months of approval. There's some caveats to that, but it's based on RSA 674-39, and this is based on the law itself, but there's an opportunity for temporary vesting and then permanent vesting. And temporary vesting occurs once you've done some substantial development, and we define that in our regulations. We also defined it for this application as occurring after the grading, the installation of the infrastructure, parking, water, sewer, drainage structures, and underground utilities and foundation work would be completed. So that is the threshold that Mr. Cheney would have to reach to be able to meet that first step of vesting within the 24 months. And then after a certain number of years, and I want to say 5 years, if the project is completely done, then there's permanent vesting that occurs, which immunes the project from any subsequent changes in zoning, subdivision, and site plan regulations.
But vesting is more a state requirement than ours.
Well, we are required as part of our applications to clarify and define at what point vesting occurs. And basically, it's a 24-month process initially. And in our developer's agreement, basically, he has 24 months to get started with the project so that if there are changes in the regulations, and there's constantly changes in state and federal regulations governing projects, then, you know, he would have to come back to the board with a new application that addresses any changes that occurred if he doesn't meet the threshold within the first 24 months.
Right. Rosie?
So do we have the right as a planning board under 674-39 to extend it even though he hasn't vested?
The planning board has that authority.
Two separate issues.
But another way of looking at it is, you know, we could change the threshold for when vesting, the first step, the temporary vesting occurs, and maybe tie it to something like, and I'll just throw this out for discussion, you know, maybe demolition of the buildings and, you know, prepping the site, not necessarily putting all the infrastructure in and foundation work, that sort of thing. So it's up to the planning board to define when those periods occur. And the planning board can extend it, you know, beyond 24 months if there's, you know, due cause, and it would basically be a, you know, modification to our site review approval.
Well, is there any downside for the town in granting an extension?
Not, personally, I don't believe there is, and I know that the town worked very hard on changing the zoning. This was before Mr. Cheney had come before us with his project, and to encourage mixed-use development in the M2A zone on Exeter Road. We put a lot of time into it. The town council put a lot of time into studying it and made some modifications. And then he came in with his development proposals, and, you know, there's a significant investment on our part in terms of the approval. And I think the planning board at the end of the day, at the time, was unanimous approval in support of the project, and that it was consistent. And he received his special use permits and site plan approval based on his good faith efforts to move forward with the project at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
And to finish, it's done more or less, too, to protect the developer if there's any zoning changes at all. So are we able, as a planning board, if we give him the extension, that if any ordinances that we have that would apply to his project, do we have any ability to incorporate those new rules and regs to this project going forward?
If he has met the threshold that we established, which is, clearly spelled out in paragraph 3 on page 10 or 12. We can change when this substantial development occurs, which would give him, some temporary immunity or relief, if you will, from those regulations.
Right. Just one little thing. I mean, I wasn't here I don't think I was here for the last meeting, and something came up about, in the back end, he wants to put just any fence and not a wrought iron fence, and we've changed the aesthetic review from 108, and just that, but we can't change it, but I just thought I'd mention it. But,
Well,
fence
he-
is wrought iron.
okay.
It was changed, in fact, during the
It was
process,
changed during the
it
process.
would.
Right, but you're going to use wrought iron?
Well, it's gonna be metal fence,
Right.
That was the final plan.
That was part of the approval.
It was one of the conditions of approval.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Val. Sorry.
So because the buildings are still existing, that you haven't removed them, they're still on the tax rolls.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, if you think about that too. If,
Yeah.
if we're looking to change the threshold, do you really want to incentivize them to remove the buildings? What, would that be in the best public interest
Because
at
basically.
this point in time?
Yeah, in a couple of years, if it still doesn't come to fruition, he could fix them up and start renting them. So, to ask a demolition.
Does anybody else have any questions? Anybody over here? Questions, concerns, comments? I personally don't see any downside to us granting an extension.
There's a specific time that's being requested.
His letter said 24 months.
Yeah, extension of 2 years, so we'll bring it up to 25.
What's the pleasure of the board?
Have someone make a motion to approve?
Go ahead. Roseanne, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'd like to make a motion to approve an extension for 24 months to Cheney Property Management Corporation, continuation of a request for extension of approval for an application for site plan and special use permit at 52, 54, and 56 Exeter Road, tax map U4, lots 12, 13, and 14 in the M2A zone. The approval was to remove 3 existing buildings and construct a 2-story, 27,000 square foot mixed-use building with commercial on the first floor and residential on the second floor. And that would bring it to 2020 of this, from the original date of the
Yeah, I think it's just clearer if you just say an extension of 2 years. from-
extension of 2 years from the
Leave
date
it at
of.
that. Yep.
Second.
Can I ask one question in between this? So that means that after 2 years, if substantial construction begins, then the 5-year period kicks in for vesting.
Temporary vesting.
Temporary
Until it's
vesting.
complete, and then it's
Right.
permanent.
Right. So that this doesn't erase any of the 5 years from the current end period. Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
Who seconded that? Janice, thank you. I'm sorry.
All right, hearing none. All those in favor of granting the extension, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Hopefully you'll find an investor.
We're trying.
All right. Next on the agenda is Marker 44 Holdings LLC, public hearing for an application for subdivision at 20 Eagle Drive, tax map R2, lot 36-10-5 in the R1 zone. The proposal is for a minor subdivision which involves subdividing out the building footprint, driveway, and sidewalk to be retained by the current homeowners. The remaining land to be conveyed to the Hill at Moody Point Homeowners Association in accordance with the revised final site plan for lots 10-2 through lot 10-16 and lots 9-1 through 9-4. Plan D21471 at the Rockingham County Registry of Deeds, dated September 1991. Good evening.
Good evening. Val Shelton, wants to recuse myself from the board.
Going to appoint Glenn.
Oh,
Do you need to
I
appoint
will
an
appoint
alternate?
Glenn as an alternate to sit in. Thank you, Rosie.
So I think everyone has a copy, Diane, put that in everyone's boxes on the full application, and on the last page of that is the proposed reconfiguration plan. There's a copy here. This is similar to the same concept as what came before the board a couple months ago. One of the owners here, Parrot, and who also represented another owner, the Hugheses, on their reconfiguration plan. So the Hill at Moody Point is a 20 home site subdivision. It was created, I think, first received final approval in 1992, I believe. And it was set up as having 20 lots. I use some lots in quotes because under that original subdivision approval, the owner of the home site, if you will, which they could purchase in fee simple, they had a obligation by the deed and under the requirements of the planning board's acceptance of this concept to reconfigure the lot after they built the house. And when I say reconfigure the lot would then be resurveyed. The land encompassing the foundation of the house and garage, as well as the driveway to connect it to Eagle Drive, which is a private road, owned by the homeowners association, became really the land, if you will, that the owner ended up owning. And then the obligation was to deed back the remainder land to the homeowners association. The homeowners association has the obligation to maintain that land under their covenants. So this is step 2 of that process. This is the 13th house, I believe, to go through this process before the board. And there will be 7 more. As homes get built, that will be going through the reconfiguration process.
Thank you, Val. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Looking at the plan, Val, it looks like that the house is built already?
The house is built.
The house is built, okay. And it looks like the corner of the house is right on the boundary line. Are they,
Large plan. And Diane's reviewed the plan.
are they in compliance with the setbacks?
It doesn't apply,
Setbacks.
setbacks don't apply to this subdivision.
Okay.
As you know, this was part of the original Moody Point approval that came in under the old, what we used to call the ADS, the Alternative Subdivision Design. And basically, through the approval in '91, they created a 0 lot line subdivision. So basically, the the buildings could be configured as close to the property line as was feasible. And there really isn't anything in the town's regulations where we can now come back, after the fact and say those requirements don't apply.
Okay. And you said this is step 2. How many steps are there?
Well, step 2 is the reconfiguration plan, and if all 20 go through this reconfiguration, then all these lot lines in between completely disappear. And the step 3, I believe, is a requirement for the original developer to file an as-built plan of the entire project. Would be step 3.
Any other questions? I'm fine with this. We've done a bunch of these before. It's odd, but this is the way it was approved, so. If there's no further questions, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd
Go
just
ahead.
like to say that I have reviewed the application. The application is complete. It's ready for acceptance by the planning board, and I would recommend approval so that we can get the plan signed and they can move forward with the recording.
Okay, so I think we ought to do 2 steps, and we
Sure.
should entertain a motion to accept the application as complete.
Motion made.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So we've accepted the application. Now is there a motion on the application itself?
I'll make a motion to accept the application for subdivision for Marker 44 Holdings LLC at 20 Eagle Drive, tax map R2, lot 36-10-5 in the R1 zone. The proposal is for a minor subdivision which involves subdividing out the building footprint, driveway, and sidewalk to be retained by the current homeowners, the remaining land to be conveyed to the Hill at Moody Point Homeowners Association in accordance with the revised final site plan for lots 10-2 through lot 10-16 and lots 9-1 through 9-4. Deed 21471 at the Rockingham County Registry of Deeds dated September 1991.
Rosie, can I ask you to make a change to that? At the beginning, you said accept the application or approve the application. Could you amend that to approve the subdivision?
Approve the subdivision, sorry.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion, comment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
She has a Mylar she's hoping she could get signed. Are you ready for the Mylar to be signed, Valerie? Okay.
Okay. All righty, thank you all. We will move on to new and old business. Diane, do you have anything?
Do I have any? Yes, I do. Well, we have a report here from the zoning subcommittee who met on Thursday of last week, July 6th, to look at the proposed assisted living overlay district that was on the agenda for a public hearing at the June meeting. And at the time, there was a feeling that the ordinance needed some revisions, and the planning board suggested that the subcommittee get back together again to revisit some of the issues. And we did have a meeting. We had some lengthy discussions back and forth, and the committee came forward with a general recommendation that we change the focus of the overlay district from just a general assisted living overlay district, which is broader and encompasses a greater number of uses, to a more defined use that really focused on just skilled nursing facilities and memory impaired units. And we have some draft language that has been put together as sort of a starting point for our discussions going forward. And what the recommendation of the subcommittee is at this point is that we set up a work session for the entire planning board and sit down and review the language, fine-tune it as necessary, and hopefully put forward a proposal that can be aired at a public hearing in September. And I guess with that, I'd ask the subcommittee if they had any further comments to add or suggestions or information for the board.
I'll just add that I thought we had a really productive meeting.
Yes.
Mr. Levy, who's in the audience, also participated. I think that we really hashed out this whole concept that we wanted this to be extremely low impact relative to traffic. And I think that's where we came to have a consensus on the particular recommendations that Diane has now updated as far as the use.
I happen to agree with what's Claudia of New Road, I forgot her last name. When looking at this.
Rosie, can I hold on for a
that's
second? We're not prepared to talk about the details in this tonight because we just got it.
Oh,
So could you
okay.
hold any comments you have in the
And
details
it's not agended.
to our workshop?
Okay.
All right, so I guess I'll ask everybody when.
My
we just got this to
my
review
only
it.
question with that is where in the process of resolving the lot line boundaries and
Oh,
recording
okay.
of those?
All
Where
right,
is
at the
that?
last meeting, we had a letter from John Radigan, who's our
Right.
town legal counsel, and it was his recommendation or his observation that the tax maps were incorrect, and he has advised that we go back to the original configuration that shows 39.5 acres for the Ham parcel, and that's what the deed that the town has on the books right now that's active and current. indicates. So I have updated the map to show the new configuration, which basically restores the boundaries to what they were back in 1978, I think was the date, when the original survey was done by Bruce Prohopek, who was the surveyor, who worked with the town at that time. So, we are going to be putting together a request for a tax map merger for the planning board to consider at the next meeting. And upon advice of our legal counsel, because there are going to be changes to lot lines that people have an understanding are the correct lot lines, to give people, in particular, the next door neighbor, Shearwater Investment folks, an opportunity to review and comment and participate in any, public discussion that they may have concerning this, because there's implications here, because the lot that was shown of theirs was 39.5 acres, when in fact it's 32.3 acres. So we just want to provide them the opportunity to participate, come forward with any information. And I will be sending out a letter to Shearwater Investments tomorrow. Legal counsel has reviewed it, approved it, and we have the language together for the notice of merger, which we'll put forward for the next meeting.
Great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank
A
you.
question, Diane. I know a question's been raised about the acreage in different parcels, but also a question regarding the Wilson property, the town property. But, well, hear me out though, but some people thought it was larger than what's depicted now. I know that the Prue Oil Company came before the planning board contemplating putting a facility there. And I'm just wondering, in their application, did they have it surveyed, and did they state the acreage on that application? Just to use for a comparison before we go through the process of notifying Shearwater, and they lost a few acres in all this new configuration.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
I know that there are plans in the files from when Prue came in. Whether there's a boundary survey, I don't know. We'd have to look. I think it's clear, though, what the boundaries of the outline are. And, if we really, it's not up to the planning board to go out and do survey work or to hire a surveyor to clarify boundaries. We have to use the best available information we have, which is our tax map information. The only way to really ascertain it, again, is to go through and have a legal review and to look at the deeds and to do a title search.
Because
And I really don't think that's, and Mr. Radigan agreed, that's really not an appropriate role of the planning board to
Because
request that.
I know when I was on planning board at the time when Prue came before us, and I remember Bill Doucette being on site with us and pointing out there was a house down the road for access, so I believe there was some type of surveying, so it could be beneficial just to give a quick peruse to that application, just for the heck
I'd
of
be
it.
happy to do that.
Just
I
to
do want to
settle.
mention that it's very, very common that the information on the tax maps and on vision appraisal for assessment data is not based on surveys, so there are a lot of discrepancies and errors. It's very, very common. So this is not an unusual thing that really should have any bearing on this.
I agree with that completely.
Zoning
I see
proposal.
that every day.
So you would just look at the deed, basically, that when we bought the Wilson property, how many acres are on the deed?
Well, the
Um,
acres are the least important. To not get too technical, the acres aren't that important on the deed. They're the least important thing. If you have bearings and distances and lengths and things like that, that takes weight over the acreage. If you only have acreage, that has some weight, but.
Well, I think that's something that
yeah.
we should check into.
Yeah, and I agree with you, it doesn't hurt to check
Yeah.
in the file and see if there was a plan done to
Right.
use as a reference. So
Okay.
so we're gonna schedule this for our August meeting, right?
The merger once,
Well, I'm talking about the.
oh, yes,
the
for
whole- whole
for the work,
package.
yes, I'm
Yes.
sorry, for the work session.
yeah.
And the merger will hopefully come through
What kind
in
of-
August.
So what kind of merger are we doing? We don't have the ability to,
We have a
Wow.
tax map.
we can change the tax maps. is
We're
what
going
you're
to change
saying,
the
right?
tax maps, but the
Oh,
town
okay.
council has advised us, because there's a subdivision on the
Right.
books that the tax map was based on. That basically, because we are the owner of those lots, we have the right to to merge them, and there is a process under the RSAs by which land is
The
merged.
town is gonna file. the
And it's the
application.
town who's
Okay.
going to be filing the application.
Okay.
And
That
we
makes
have that
sense. I was
right.
confused. I thought you were saying the
No,
planning
we're
board
not the
was just
planning
gonna
board
do
that
it.
No,
No,
it-
we're
but
just gonna
I'm
act
just,
on
it's really not the purview of the planning board to question survey data and titles.
I agree. I agree
It's
completely.
not, that's the
Not our
domain
responsibility.
of
I agree.
title examiners
I agree. And lawyers. That's the thing.
and lawyers.
Okay, so is there anything else under new business? Diane, do you have anything else?
No, I think I'm all set for now.
Anybody else have anything under new business? Anybody have any old business they want to bring up? Any committee reports? Council?
Sure.
Amy?
So our last town council meeting was June 21st. And we had 2 public hearings for ordinances. I'll look at this. And so one was the signs that we all went through and updated, and that was approved. And then the other one was regarding sewers. So, and that was also approved. And then we also did, we had 3 resolutions that we approved, 2 regarding paving, and 1 was an air conditioning unit in the police station.
What was the sewer ordinance?
It's sewer user ordinance,
Yeah.
which is required
Okay.
under the funding programs for the wastewater treatment plant.
There's a third one, for the repair of the parking lot.
Oh, yes,
yeah.
the parking lot, yes.
Thank you.
I'm just reading.
Yeah, so.
Over in
we
Bay
had the
Road?
street paving the parking lot, and that was it, right?
Yep.
Oh, and the air conditioner, yeah, right, so, yeah.
All right. Anybody have anything else? Janice?
Want me to make a motion to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No opposition? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you